So we discussed that if you have what's called an investment scheme whereby the investor is not going to suffer any loss if the capital which he provided goes down, and yet he's either guaranteed a return, in which case it's ribis doraisa, or he's not guaranteed a return, but he'll get a set amount, call it 50% of the profits, then it's ribis drabanan. That's a problem. But let's continue on discussing investments, because we want to get to the place where we are today, where essentially you could give someone as money for an investment with a concept called heter iska, and you could take a return. So how does that work? So before we get into that, let's look at a Gemara in Bava Metzia on page 92, Kuf Daled Amud Beis. Amar Nahar Doi. It is 7 lines up from the bottom. Hi iska. When this concept of an iska, palga malve or palga pikadon. Whenever we talk about an iska, the word iska literally means business. La soik b'divrei saira. The way it works is it's half a loan and half a deposit. So in other words, Reuven gives $100,000 to Shimon and says to Shimon, Hetzachzi, you are going to have $50,000 as a loan, which means you got to give me $50,000 back, and $50,000 as a deposit, which means if the investment suffers a loss, then on my $50,000, I will absorb the loss. So let's say if the $100,000 turns into $90,000, then the investor will get back $95,000. The $50,000 is guaranteed, and if there's $10,000 loss, so he only has $50,000, that's a pikadon, so therefore he will have to suffer a $5,000 loss. Conversely, if there is a $10,000 gain, he will get $105,000 back. This helps the malve because he's getting profit back, and this helps the love because he's not taking responsibility for the whole amount. The Gemara says, wait a minute. Could the borrower take his $50,000 and use it to drink beer? That's not what the investor wants, because let's face it, there's a huge difference between investing $50,000 and investing $100,000. So even though it's structured as a half a loan, half a pikadon or investment, if you will, but the reality is, as the Gemara is going to say in the name of Rava, that the borrower, even though $50,000 of this pot of $100,000 is calculated as a loan, it's not a classical loan in the sense where you could just do whatever you want with the money. Because the fellow is only giving you $100,000 to start with in order to invest it. That's clearly the purpose here. He doesn't want you to invest $50 and $50 just to hand back to him at the end of the time. He wants $100,000 invested. That is why it's called an iska. And therefore, there is no right of the person who's managing the investment, let's call him, the borrower, let's call him, just to do whatever he wants with the money. Now, let's look at a Mishnah in Bava Metzia, which is going to explain that even such a scheme has a huge problem of ribis d'Rabbanan l'chol hapachos. Says the Mishnah in Bava Metzia on page 93. Ein moshivin chenvani lamachzis schar. You cannot make a deal with a storekeeper for 50% of the price of the profits. Okay? Now, how does this work? The store sells fruit at a certain price point because it sells at retail. The farmer sells at wholesale. So what are they going to do? The farmer gives the storekeeper the produce, totally, and they will agree to split 50% of the prices, of the profits, plus they will agree that the storekeeper has to compensate the farmer for 50% of the produce, irrespective if the produce goes bad. So it's exactly the iska I told you about. 50% of the produce, we'll say, is a deposit from the farmer, and 50% of the produce is a loan, so to speak, to the storekeeper, and the storekeeper will pay him back the value at such time as he sells the produce. Now, obviously, if the entire amount of produce was merely under the ownership of the farmer, it wasn't a loan at all, there'd be no halachic problem. Because the storekeeper is essentially working for the farmer for 50% of the profits. But the farmer doesn't want to do that, because if the food goes rotten, if the refrigeration breaks, he'll be on the hook for the whole loss. So he wants to split the loss with the storekeeper. So he structures it that 50% of the produce is in fact going to be a loan. And the storekeeper will be obligated to pay him for that produce irrespective of what happens to the entire lot. The other 50% will be an investment, and if there's a loss, the farmer will suffer the loss. Nonetheless, the Mishnah says you can't do it. Now, what is the problem of doing this? The problem of doing this is that the storekeeper is getting a loan of 50% of the apples. Everybody with me? How many apples is he selling? He's selling 100% of the apples. What are they doing? They're splitting the profits. So far, so good. But what about all the labor of the storekeeper to sell 100% of the apples? So he is toiling in the 50% of the farmer because he got a 50% loan. You see, if it was all under the ownership of the farmer, then there's no loan here. So he's doing the tircha for 50% of the profits. That's fine. You could make up whatever arrangement you want. But over here, part of it is a loan. So think about it. He'd be happier turning to the farmer and saying, perhaps, I don't need your other 50%. I'll just do the loan and keep the profits, right? But obviously the farmer doesn't want that because he wants profits too. So therefore he's structuring it. You could only take 50% as a loan if you toil in my 50% of a pikadon, we call it, of an investment. Now, the farmer doesn't want to give the whole thing as an investment. It would also be mutter because he doesn't want to be a hook if all the fruit spoils. So therefore he has this deal. So therefore there's a problem whenever you have an iska for the work that the investee, let's call him, is doing on the 50% that's a loan for the other half that's not. And therefore the way to solve it is you pay the investee $1 or the amount of money as a poel batel. You pay him money if he would sit and do nothing. Now, the amount of money you get for sitting and do nothing is more than the amount of money you get for your job, right? If let's say we have a lawyer that makes $1,000 an hour. So he may sit and do nothing for $7.50 an hour. He's not going to sit and do nothing for $0 an hour because he's going to have nothing to eat tomorrow morning. But the extra money that he may get paid to sit and do nothing, he may be happy. He may say, listen, I want you not to work. It's just essentially what people do today in business when they buy someone out with a severance package. Is basically what you're paying for is how much will the guy take to do nothing but still make enough money that he's going to agree to the buyout. Right? Isn't that how it works? Essentially. That's essentially the idea.
Why can't you simply arrange that his profit share is on the farmer, the storekeeper's profit share would be on the 50% that he borrowed. But that would he borrow that?
That's true.
His profit would come from there.
It's true. It does. But what about the work? Every single day he's sitting there selling apples. Whereas the investor is sitting on the beach drinking a beer.
Part of it is
No, but the work is the ribbis. You understand me? The work is the ribbis. The fact that he's selling the apples of the farmer for free. The work is the ribbis. Everybody with me about this? Not the profit, the toil is the ribbis. If I lend you $100, I can't say I want you to give me $100 back. I also want you to clean my house or mow my lawn. That's ribbis. Okay? And if you look at Shulchan Aruch on page 94, Kofa and Zion, it says the Mechaber B'Madvar Morim B'Shalom Pasak Yibah B'Tchilas Eisek. When they didn't make any agreement to the beginning of the business. You just said we'll split the profits. But if you make the deal, you just have to pay the investee something. Okay? Something, and we paskin it mutter. And he points out, the Ramah points out what I said before, that this is all if one party is giving the money. Important concept. Let's say we both give money into this pot, okay? We both put money into the pot. That's not called a loan, that's called a partnership. In which case, it's immaterial and it's called a shutfus and this whole thing doesn't apply. Now the Shach says something very interesting. The Shach says, if we both give money into the pot, even if we divide the profits and the losses differently, nonetheless, it is not ribis. So let's understand what this means. If Reuven and Shimon, each person puts $50,000 into the investment, how much is the total investment? $100,000. But the Lamaisa, Reuven is going to be on the beach. Shimon is going to do the work. So they agree that it's going to work like this. Shimon will get 70% of the profits, but Reuven will take 50% of the losses. That's mutter. According to Shach, that's mutter. Because that's still a business. That's not ribis. That's still they're in business together. That's not ribis. Now, this is a big machlokas. This is a big machlokas. If both people put money into the pot, right, do we look at that as a business, in which case there's no ribis, even if they structure the profit sharing differently based on who's doing more labor? Or do we say that the part that I'm putting into the pot, it's still ribis because you're kind of working for me for free? Okay, so let's understand this, and let's look at the Chavas Das on page 95. We need to read the Chavas Das inside. Nira de dafka le'inyan shein tzarach lo'iten lo schar tircha keven de osek b'shvil mo shelo. This is only that you don't need to pay the other person for the fact that he's toiling because he put money into the pot also. V'gam dami l'shotvas. Aval osur la'makabel l'kabel la'atzmo chilek behefsed yoser mimashenota berevach. Very important concept. If Reuven and Shimon each put $50,000 into the pot, right? And Shimon is the managing partner. He's going to run the investment. And Reuven is only going to take 30% of the losses for whatever reason, but get 50% of the profit. The Chavas Das says that's also. You know why? Because on the 20% of the investment that is not taking the losses, that's called a loan. That's called a loan. You may not have said it's a loan, but it's a loan. Let me just say it out. No, let me say it out so we get this clear, okay? Let me just say it out and then you can comment. We have two people put in, Reuven and Shimon, $50,000 each into the pot. Let's follow this because it's complicated. Reuven is going to be on the beach. Shimon is going to run the investment. For whatever reason, we don't know. Maybe Reuven is a person that Shimon wants to be in partnership with. Reuven and Shimon make the following deal. That if there's losses, Reuven only has to be responsible for 30% of the losses. If there's profit, they split it evenly. So now what are we saying? Reuven put how much into the pot? $50,000. But how much is he really guaranteed to get back out of that? $20,000. Because he only agreed to 30% of losses. So you could talk about a business, as the Chavas Das. Facts are, on the $20,000, it's a loan. You may not have used the words loan, but right. So the way we say that in Hebrew is anytime that Shimon's taking achrayus, responsibility to return the money that he got, Chavas Das says, you may not have used the word loans and borrowing once in the entire conversation, you may never use it, but we call that a loan.
If you have an investment, there's potential of loss. If there's no potential of loss, it's not an investment, it's a loan.
Right, that's what the Chavas Das says. The Shach argues. But that's what the Chavas Das says. That's exactly true. Let's look at the Trumas Hadeshin on page 97. Now, my friends, this Trumas Hadeshin, I have to be honest, is really the source of what we do today. This is the source how you could lend money and get a return. and still not be responsible for the loss. So far, we have discussed how you could give someone money, only be responsible for half the loss, and get half the profits. But that does not allow you to be responsible for the whole loss, right? To be responsible for half the profits and no loss. So look at the lashon of the Trumas Hadeshim. The story was that Reuven wants to give money to Shimon, that he should lend them to Shimon, and he will get a return and be guaranteed almost 100% that the principal will not go down the drain. Okay, that's the goal of everybody who invests money. No one wants to take a risk. Let's read the opening languages of the tshuva of the Trumas Hadeshim Stam. It's beautiful language. Yira limtzo takono tzadam las meter. Let's try to see if we could do this beheter. Ela de mistafina. I'm very afraid, says the Trumas Hadeshim. Deshema idei dikduke halalu uvikshut vakashos tachpulos lahater makachomatan bribis. Through the particulars and coming up with schemes to be permit borrowing and lending with ribis. Yeh divrei Torah. The words of the Torah will be like a joke. In other words, if I come up with a scheme, how we could, so to speak, excuse my language, get around the Torah's prohibition of ribis, it'll turn the Torah into a joke. However, mikol makom omrim v'tzadikim yelchubo. V'tzadikim yelchubo. Okay? Now, everybody agrees, says the Trumas Hadeshim, that if the lender takes responsibility for loss, that you could get even a fixed amount of interest. So what do I mean by that? Reuven gives Shimon $100,000 to invest. Lends him the money. But Reuven says to Shimon, if the $100,000 disappears because of a circumstance beyond your control, or the $100,000 is stolen, you don't need to give it back to me. So you probably would say that's not called a loan, because Reuven bears the achrayas. The malveh bears the achrayas. Everybody with me? In which case, for sure, Reuven could take interest. But that's not what we want to accomplish here. We want a way that Shimon can take achrayas and still pay Reuven interest. This is how we do it. Sheruven hanosein, the Reuven, the person who's giving the money, yekabel olav kol achrayas, will accept all the responsibility, afilu shel gnei vaveda, even if the money is stolen. Afilu b'pshia yeh b'achrayuso, even with negligence, Reuven the malva, I know this sounds counterintuitive, will be totally responsible. In which case, it is not a loan. Im Shimon hamakabel posheh b'mamon kol kach shedomu kamazik b'yodayim. Except if Shimon is such a negligent person, it's like he's destroying it with his hands. Yischayev Shimon b'achrayuso, then Shimon will be responsible, right? If I give you my item to watch, and you go and take a hammer and smash it, for sure you're responsible. It doesn't turn it into a loan. So Reuven is responsible for a circumstance beyond Shimon's control. Reuven is responsible if the item gets stolen or the money gets stolen. Reuven's responsible for that. Except if Shimon is so negligent, he's like a mazik, then he'll be responsible. So far, so good. And Reuven could take interest. Why could Reuven take interest? Even a fixed amount. Because not alone. V'gam yekabel alav, and Shimon will also accept upon himself shelo yehei ne'eman afilu b'shvua doraisa, that he won't be believed even with a shvua. V'afilu al pi'edim, even with witnesses, even if there are 100. Shelo pasha b'pshir gedola shu kamazik b'yadayim. Reuven accepts upon himself that he won't be believed to say he wasn't a mazik. Rakim ya'idu lo harav vashatz, except if the rabbi and the shlich tzibur, he means here like the president, the gabbai in the shul, anoshim yoshvei olam ba'ir, and all the chashuv people in the city, sheyesh lehem yediyah b'masu matin, they know how business works. Hema yu ne'monim lo hayed b'raya v'diyah gemur, they will be believed to say that Shimon did not cause any loss. Now Reuven will be guaranteed in the principle. Why? Because Shimon is agreeing to say that he only is considered to be not negligent if the rabbi, the president, all the people in the city that know business testify they know with certainty that he wasn't posheya. And there's no way that'll ever happen. How are these people going to know? This is how he comes up with an idea to permit, so to speak, ribis. Everybody with me so far in this scheme? But he doesn't like it. He says, "Ein raya mikan she'shachapes stadim v'tiktukim rak lahatir haribis drabanan." We shouldn't use this to be matir Torah ribis. Rak lahatir ribis drabanan. And what does that mean? When I give you $100,000 and I don't set an actual amount of money that I'll get back, I don't set an actual return. I agree that I'll split the profits. I agree that if there's a loss, I won't take the loss. You know why I won't take the loss? Because Shimon is going to have to get 100 people to testify and know bivados that he wasn't mazik, and there's no way to do that. But you see, if I'm not guaranteed profits, I'm only agreeing that if there's a profits, I'll get 50%, so it's not doraisa, it's only drabana ribis, then the Trumas Hadeshin is willing to say that he could use his scheme to be matir an investment. Sof kol sof, that's the Trumas Hadeshin. When we return on Tuesday, Mirz Hashem, we'll see that the Shach expands this scheme of the Trumas Hadeshin. Everybody should have a wonderful Shabbos.